Right. Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Planning Committee B for October, 17th of October. I'll start off a bit of housekeeping as always. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if there is a fire, please just follow us to the exits. The main fire exit is down this way, and toilets are to the back. Please turn off any phones. I'll put them on silent. And can I remind everyone when you're speaking, this is the same for public participants, there's a microphone button on your speaker. If you can just press that till it goes green, that'll mean that you can be heard. So once you press that, you can be heard. Just make sure that's on whenever you want to speak. We'll move swiftly. We don't have any apologies, do we? The only apology we have is that oh, sorry, yeah, we have one substitute. Sorry, we've got one substitute, which is Councillor Ward be substituting for Councillor Fenton. Thank you. I'll just note that Councillor Baxter is delayed, so she's likely to miss the first item, but she will be joining us later as well. We've got item 1, declarations of interest. I'd like to note any interests at this stage. I think I'll just note probably the same for most of us, but I know the applicant and we're a colleague of the applicant for item 4C, but I don't see you're predetermined on the item, essentially, as a work colleague. We'll move on again. So the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have anything they'd like to raise on the minutes? Yeah, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on page 6, in the reasons for approval of application, I think it was 4A, it says objections were on the grounds that the EA project does not fully protect cell B15. I don't think that's an accurate characterisation of the objections. The objections are about increased flood risk, not lack of protection. So I'd like to propose deleting that, please, and basically deleting everything. Basically deleting objections are on the grounds that the EA project does not fully protect cell 15. The NPPF test in this respect is not whether the scheme is comprehensive, it has to be assessment its own merits. I propose deleting that and just replacing it with the NPPF test is.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks. And you passed us this note. So I mean I'm happy with that. Is there any other comments anyone would like to raise on the minutes? So we're happy to take those with the changes there. Item. I think that's a yes. So yeah, thank you. Okay, we haven't got any on item 3 for public participation generally, so we'll move on to item 4A. We have quite a few people here today, so just for background, we will run through a presentation for each one from the development manager, and then we will have a small period of public participation and questions as well, followed by all the discussion and voting initially will be on the officer recommendation as it stands. If that changes for any reason, then we'll go to the next stage, but all of that will be around the officer recommendation as it is in the report, just for clarity. Gareth, can you take us through the first item for 4A, please?
Thank you, Chair. Item 4A is planning application at 102 Tadcaster Road in Dringhouses. There we go. It's an application for the construction of 4 detached houses. This is the site as site as it stands at the moment, so the existing site plan. As usual, I've included a couple of Google 3D views of the site, slightly out of date, for which I will explain in a second. So here we've got Tadcaster Road running broadly north-south with a northeastern kink to it. The East Coast main line, and then the site just going around with the pointer. These trees have been removed, so they're no longer on site. So there's 4 or 5 there. Some ground level photographs. So just for point of reference, see the garage here in number 100, the garden of number 100 rather. It's that garage building there, and then 1, 2, 3 houses to that northern boundary. A shot looking straight down the garden. And then to the south, these are that's number 108A, and then there's 108B to the rear, but that's obscured by that small tree. And then this is from the northern 3D, 3D view from the north, I should say. The horseshoe in the distance, and these are the properties at 108 A and B, and then here at 100 A, B, and C. So I said the proposal is for 4 detached houses. Plot plan shows it in a little bit more detail, a larger scale. So running along from the access road with Tadcaster Road. And then here's the edge of the East Coast Main Line. This is let's go back there. This is the retained tree at this point. Again, for reference purposes. House type 1. So the proposed elevations, house type 1 is the first one back from the retained house on the Tadcaster Road frontage. So the southwest elevation is the elevation that fronts the accessed road. You can see this is the northwest elevation and the outline of the properties in the gardens to either side. Northeast elevation, so that backs on to that boundary to the north, and then the southeast elevation. The floor plans, so predominantly laid out over ground floor, but with 2 bedrooms in the roof space. House type 2. So the southwest elevation, which faces the access road. Side elevation to the southeast. Northwest elevation, and then the elevation that backs on to that northern boundary. There are 2 of house type 2 paired in the centre of the site. Again, ground floor accommodation and first floor accommodation. Let's go back to that elevation so you can see that that first floor is formed predominantly, not entirely, within the roof. House type 3, which is at the far western end of the site, with its front elevation, and that's the adjacent house at 100B. Rear elevation with this sunken courtyard, and the side elevation. and its floor plans. The site sections. Bit small. See if I can magnify them. So the retained and shown to be extended house at 102. And then house type 1, house types 2. And then house type 3 at the bottom of the garden. Again, slightly larger, but split over the 2 images, running from Tadcaster Road through to the railway line, with the outlines of the houses behind to the north. There. Yeah. At the end of the presentation, there is a short update. Rick, can you understand?
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Chair. We have 2 additional and 1 amended condition. Condition 21, following on from the draft conditions outlined in the report, indicates a request for additional planting and or fencing along the south side, which Gareth just showed us. The boundaries to 104, 108A, and I would add 108B also, to mitigate a impact in terms of residential amenity. Condition 22 beefs up the requirements in respect of the landscape proposals 40641B, with it requiring it within the first planting season following practical completion of the development. And again, if at any point within the lifetime of the development any planting should be damaged, diseased, or should die, it should be replaced with similar species. Condition 9 relates to the proposal for an arboricultural method statement and tree protection measures. It is suggested that those protection measures also be extended to the adjacent hedgerow, primarily along the northern boundary, which is of quite significant importance in terms of both its townscape contribution and also to secure the residential amenity of the adjoining properties. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Before we get to public stations, do you have any questions, clarification on the plans that they've seen this time? Yeah, Councillor Melly, please.
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't see a condition specifically about EV charging. Is that because the EV charging is included in the plans? And if so, could you please show us where the EV charging is in the plans?
It's because the EV charging will be covered by the as a requirement of the building regulations. So it's not considered necessary to double up on the that sort of statutory requirement.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was unclear from reading all of this whether the boundaries between these properties are to be made of hedges or walls or fences. I just wondered if there was clarity about that in the plans.
There were fences, but certainly in respect of number 4, there is sufficient distance available to allow for a hedge rather than a fence, and the hedge to properly take.
So
there is a condition 4 in terms of means of enclosure.
So it's not stated explicitly whether there will
no.
be boundaries. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Ronald.
Just following up from what Councillor Melly asked about informative 3 electric charging. It's to do with building regulations, as you say. Who monitors that it has happened?
That'll be part of the building regulations inspection process, and the by whoever the applicant chooses to use as their building control approving body. So either local authority, building control, or approved inspectors.
Thank you.
Thanks. Not seeing any questions on the plans, so we will move on to public participation. First speaker is Paula Wilson, councillor for the ward, raising issues on behalf of residents. If you'd like to join us, Paula. Would you like a warning before the 30-second mark towards the end? No, thank you.
I hope not. I won't be keeping you that long. Okay, first of all, thank you for letting us come and talk. The ward members have asked for this application to come to committee as we've put my teeth in, as we've received a number of representations from local residents who are very concerned at the scale of what's proposed on this site. The reduction of 5 dwellings to 4 in the revised application is welcome, but the residents still have a number of concerns. It starts with potential damage to the boundary hedge, to your point, Councillor Vassy, caused by the excavation to the lower plot 4. This has only partially been dealt with in the planning report, and the neighbouring residents believe that a stronger condition is required to establish a root protection zone around the hedge, so that by excavating it, you don't kill it with, it won't be done intentionally, but we need to put something in place to make sure it doesn't die. The second and major concern is the impact on road safety, with the entrance to this development being almost directly opposite Hunters Way, which is already a very busy junction and took an awful lot of time when we were redoing Tadcaster Road to change it so that it was safer. The third objection, or concern rather, is that the 4 houses still represent an overdevelopment. The first 2 houses are clearly intended for family use, but they have insufficient garden or driveway space for children to play, with the only space being the main driveway or road, which serves the whole site. It would be preferable if the development was limited to 3 properties, allowing for greater play space and increased safety for children. And if I only picked it up in the presentation, but if you look at the development to the south of this development, it only housed 3 houses back from the road. Another concern is about the large grassed area with mature trees opposite the development at Hunters Way. In the past, and I've seen it, this has been used as a dumping ground for construction and landscaping vehicles, causing damage and creating sightline issues at this busy junction. I would therefore urge that the officers require the construction management plan to prohibit any parking on this grassed area opposite 102. And finally, I don't know if this is possible, but could we ask if the developers start the developing, they carry on doing the developing rather than stop and start, as some of the development down Tadcaster Road has gone on for several years with significant gaps in between. And this causes a nuisance and great anxiety to residents. Wasn't up for 3 minutes, was I? Okay, thank you ever so much.
Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Melly, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming and speaking. Have you seen this update with amended wording to condition 9 about the hedgerow?
but I
I'm just
just
wondering if that alleviates your concerns enough.
No, it's not enough. When you look at it, it says, look at the hedgerow, but what you need is you need a specific zone around it. Certainly when we were planting trees and hedges inside the city, you can put a cage around them so that nothing can disturb the roots. So there are very sensible ways of doing the protection, and it needs to be written in there.
Thanks. Not seeing other questions there from the seat. Thank you. The next speaker, I've got Joe Flanagan from ID Planning as the agent in support of the application, and I understand you'll be joined by Mark Andrews and Lee Vincent as well, if you'd both like to come up. Thank you. You've got 3 minutes to start when you're ready. Do you want a warning when you've got 30 seconds left, or are you happy? Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, for letting us present. Firstly, we don't want to repeat at length the robust assessment of the case officer from his report. I'm sure you've all read it. We wholeheartedly agree with his recommendation for approval, and we strongly believe that members should follow this recommendation and approve the scheme presented in front of you today. We acknowledge the concerns presented by the objector, but remind members the scheme before you has been updated a number of times through the process. We've worked in collaboration with the appointed officer, and we've included the reduction in the number from 5 units to 4, which we believe has achieved an appropriate scheme, which is confirmed by the case officer. All the house types, especially those along the northern boundary, plots 1, 2, and 3, have been specifically designed by the architect to have the least impact upon neighbouring amenity. They was not result in the undue overshadowing or overlooking, which is confirmed within the officer's report. All other technical matters have been addressed robustly through the process. There is no reason for members to differ from the officer's recommendation for approval. Myself, Mark Andrews, the architect, and Lee Vincent, representing the applicant, are all here to answer questions. In response to councillor who's just spoken, as you say, the road safety point, the access is as it was previously approved to the access onto Tadcaster Road. Highways have confirmed that the number of comings and goings from the additional 4 dwellings will be acceptable, and there's no highways reasons for refusal. We agree with the updated wording of condition 9, and the arboricultural method statement and the tree protection plan will be subject to further agreement through the condition, so that concern of the previous speaker can be addressed through this condition. Thank you.
Thanks. So any questions? Councillor Orrell, please.
Thank you. Looking at the sustainable design and construction, can you just clarify, it's not very clear to me, what is going to happen in terms of the photovoltaic cells and the heat pumps? Which houses have the solar panels and which don't, and so on?
Thanks for the question. So all of the properties will have photovoltaics. They're all generally orientated on the south face of the pitch, the roof pitch, and all properties are intended to have the air source heat pumps as well.
The report says the heat pumps where provision of solar panels is not possible, so that doesn't fit with what you just said.
No, so maybe some misinterpretation, and I think all of the properties are intended to have PVs and air source heat pumps to support.
So all the properties have both?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Not seeing any further questions. I don't have anything else. So if you want to take a seat, thank you for coming in and speaking. We'll move into questions and clarification on the report itself and the application to officers. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to raise to officers at this time in relation to the report or anything that's been raised by speakers? Councillor Orrell, please.
Conditions 5 and 6 say it is strongly recommended that the report is prepared by qualified, etc. And condition 6 says the same thing. Can we not make it a condition that it is rather than recommending?
I'm pretty sure that's a standard condition that we've been using for a number of years. By who undertakes them, if they come and they are insufficient or somehow lacking, then they will be refused. I'm not sure the condition can specify that the qualifications of the person who submits the report. I think that might be beyond the scope of a.
I mean, the way it reads, it could be ignored, couldn't it? And they could go and get Mr. Smith down the road to do it.
Well, it could, but then the our own environmental health officers who will look at the reports would be alerted by that and have to consider the how they can rely on the figures that are presented. But I think it'd be similar to saying you've got to get a design by an architect or a qualified ARB architect. You can't use the planning system to make that level of specification, I would say.
Okay. Condition 7. It says prior to the first occupation, the contamination should be ensured. First occupation could be a year or two down the line from when they actually start the development. As Councillor Widdowson said, sometimes developments are started and then left for some time before work is carried on. Could the local residents be in danger of some sort of contamination in the meantime between the start of the development and the actual building of the first house?
Again, these are the standard conditions for sites where there is the potential for site contamination, although I think the conditions here are probably put on because of the end user rather than any intelligence that we have about
Yeah, sure,
contaminants
sure.
on the land itself. What they have to do through condition 6, or through condition 5, they have to do the site investigation. Condition 6 then has to propose the remediation strategy. And then following the remediation strategy, if any remediation is necessary, those works have to be carried out. I'm not sure that we could. I'm not sure there's another logical trigger point we could use for that.
It's the potential time lag between start and completion of a house. That's could be a long time.
Yes, normally the remediation work is carried out prior to the commencement of construction and development. Would be the usual way of doing it. But the strategy will set out how it moves along the site if they're not doing it all in one go. Or hopefully the site investigation will find that there's no requirements to go any further. We're not at that point yet, as far as I'm aware. Haven't had any reassessments.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cullick, please.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Chair. Again, looking at condition 9, is there any reasonable way in which the concerns that we've heard about root protection can be included in that condition as a requirement of the method statement?
For the hedge, that's the amendment to condition 9 on the update.
I'm asking, does it go far enough? Could it go further?
Well, how far would you like it to go? I think that we have to approve the plan, and we can, and that plan will make sure that the whatever protection measures are included, protect that hedge as far as we can reasonably do so, and the trees.
Councillor Vassey.
Thanks, Chair. So 3 questions really here. Condition 11. This is really for my benefit more than anything else, I suspect. I'm pleased to hear the development will have solar PV and heat pumps. I'm a little confused as to why we're asking for just 75% alignment with target emission rates that have been in existence for 11 years. And why we're simply not asking for 100%. So maybe you could explain that.
Because that's what the local plan requires. So the local plan has had quite a long gestation period. We've had a change of building regs halfway through. So the base level of the local plan relies on the 2013 building regulations, and that's 75% is an uplift.
And that overrides any requirements in the MPPF. Does the MPPF not require adherence to building regulations?
No, the building regulations require the adherence to the building regulations. Right. So the the policy CC2 as originally drafted required around about a 30% uplift on the 2013 building regulations in terms of carbon reduction. The building regulations were then updated in 2021, and we modified, and that changed the building regulations, effectively negated our policy because it in itself required a 30% uplift on the 2013. So policy CC2 was then modified for that 75%. That the 30% uplift is still in there, but that 75% was added on as an aspiration subject to viability.
Okay.
So that's where we are in that rather confusing
Thank you.
position.
Thank you for that, and I just draw councillors' attention to that, since we're hoping our local plan will be adopted finally after 70 years. There's obviously work to do.
It's just taken me that long to get my head around the policy CC.
The other two questions relate to conditions 14 and 15. So condition 14 talks about a Schwegler bird box. I'd just like to add to that Swift bricks or Swift boxes. We've been trying over the past year just to make sure that was part of what we do when we approve such developments, to simply add Swift boxes at the moment of construction, or Swift bricks. So that was my first proposal. And the second one was about condition 15, where I'm glad to see there's reference to hedgehog houses. But my question about the boundary provisions actually relates to whether those hedgehogs would ever exist because of an ability or inability to cross from property to property. So could we attach to that condition that whether they are walls or fences or hedges, provision is made for hedgehogs to be able to cross those boundaries? I think they're called hedgehog holes in walls and fences. But if we're going to the trouble of having hedgehog boxes, this is the moment to simply cut a little hole and ensure that the animals will be able to move freely around this site, and also from this site to adjoining sites, because we've also been hearing about the boundary hedges between this site and the next site. So could that simply be added as a condition? Are you happy with that, Gareth?
Hedgehog holes, yes. Where fences are being proposed or walls are being proposed, yes, that can be included. We might need to change condition 15 to submission of details, but I'll give that a little bit of thought. Swift bricks, yes. The only thing I would say is that the condition follows the advice of the ecologist, and I presume that if they haven't specified Swift bricks, then that's because they feel that they're not as appropriate as what they are specifying. But if members feel that they would like to add that, then I don't think it's unreasonable.
Without pursuing avian metaphors too far, it's a chicken and egg thing. If you don't provide Swift bricks, you're not going to get Swifts. So even if they're not seen on the site, I would suggest, I'm happy to hear what others think, that it would be valuable to have them there to encourage it. Thank you.
Yeah. The only thing I would flag on this is that we did start these conversations with have we got an ecologist now? We have now got an ecologist. So we started this with the previous ecologist just before they left, and their advice was putting multiple types on the same property is not always helpful because they often like to roost together. So my view, where there's already one and we haven't had any further advice as to whether it would be beneficial, would be to not propose Swift bricks in this instance until we've had opportunity to consult with the new ecologist as to what is sensible and what isn't. So for this time, I would say we shouldn't until we've got some advice, but I think it's worthwhile keeping in mind for the future. But now that I know that we've got an ecologist, we can pick up those conversations again about what works going forward, because we did try and get this kind of as more of a standard policy, so maybe we should pick this up afterwards. Councillor Melly, please.
Thank you, Chair. On page 21, condition 5.14, public protection have raised a concern about the construction site compound and how tight the space is in terms of like tree protection areas and that sort of thing. And they've asked for a condition about the construction working area and phasing of the development. And then I couldn't actually see a condition about that. I was just wondering why it's not in a recommended condition, or is it sort of part of condition 9?
Sorry, where's the reference you're saying?
Page 21, paragraph 5.14.
Sorry, I thought you said 521.
The construction site compound is included within our condition 2, the very final plan that says Kemp plan includes the construction site compound. And it sits, as you say, with condition 9 in terms of anything to do with that operation being controlled in terms of protecting both the hedge now and the trees. You recall from yesterday from viewing the video site visit, there were several semi-mature trees within the actual hedge.
Thanks. I'm not seeing any other, yeah, Councillor Orrell, please.
Yeah, could be completely wrong on, should there be a 106 contribution? And if so, where is it? Because I can't. Oh, there isn't.
Yeah, below this. Yeah, go on.
In terms of section 106 contributions for open space and affordable housing, they are for a variety of policy reasons levied on developments over a certain size. This is below that certain size.
So Chair, does that exclude all 106 contribution? I know the affordable housing one. Contributions or nothing?
Not necessarily, but it would have to be, it would have, certainly on contributions towards changes to the highway that were necessary, for example, then there's no threshold on that one, but I don't think anything's been identified here.
Education?
Education is, I think the threshold is used to be 4, but it would be dependent on whether the education team identified there was a need. Open space, there is a policy in the local plan.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But that policy is considered to not have sufficient waiting time. We wait for adoption before moving that forward.
So have education been asked whether there's a need, because it's the family houses, so presumably education will be involved.
There was not a view that it was required in this location.
Okay.
Thanks. Councillor Cullick.
Thanks, Chair. Again, picking up on the things mentioned by the local council as a public speaker, concerns were raised about potential parking on the grassed areas at the front of this. Is there anything that can be done to address that isn't already in the conditions?
I think that's something that I'm presuming they are part of the adopted highway. And if they are, that would be for our Borough Highways team parking if they can, maybe not parking, but highways can take action against people parking on those grass verges, I would say. Certainly something that's happened on Clarence Street in recent weeks for contractors parking on the verge. It's not something that we would put a planning condition on normally, especially if it's part of the public highway, because our enforcement powers tend to be levied on the landowner, and we can't take action against ourselves as that corporate body. It wouldn't normally be something that that planning enforcement would attempt to control.
Thanks. Did you have a question? Sorry, Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. It just follows on from Councillor Orrell's point and Section 106 agreements. Am I correct in thinking that since February this year, the biodiversity net gain rules make provision for applications where biodiversity can't be enhanced on site for a contribution to be made to enhance biodiversity elsewhere in the vicinity, in the neighbouring vicinity? And has that been discussed on this particular application?
That is correct, but it applied to proposals that were submitted after a certain due date in April, and this was submitted before that due date in April. It will be looked at in terms of other proposals of a similar size, including ones which will come before a future committee.
Thanks. Right, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we will move on to discussion on the officer recommendation, or if anyone wants to make proposals or seconding. So I'll open up the floor. Would anyone like to start on discussion around the officer recommendation for this application? Not seeing anything at this time. So was that hand? No. Yeah, Councillor Vassy.
Okay, Chair, yes, I'll go with this. With the changes to the conditions that we've discussed, I'm broadly happy with this and would be happy to propose it.
Yeah, okay.
I do take on board the reservations that have been made, but I think we've addressed some of those conditions.
Yeah. I'm not seeing any hands, so we'll take that as a proposal. So in my view, the same, I think. There was a lot of concerns that were raised at the start. I think the revisions that the applicants made are suitable, and it seems a reasonable scheme. I'm happy to support it. So I'm happy to second and move to a vote. Oh, just to note, discussion around condition on hedgehog holes in fences. Fine. I think we should put that in, definitely. Are you happy to exclude Swift at this time until we get further advice, or as a committee? Because I don't think we can do it until we've got advice. It's actually beneficial for the wildlife, would be my view.
Yeah, and I just wish we had something in place. We can have that.
We'll get a formal response before the next one. Yeah, Councillor Waters, sorry.
Well, just given the design of the buildings, Swift bricks, inserted would be perfectly in line with the design. I just wonder whether you could check your discretion to actually ask the architect whether he would be happy for that to be conditioned.
Oh, for the ecologist, yeah. Yeah, I could take that away as an option, or do we need to include it now?
If we were to take it away, then we just need to do a different recommendation.
Okay.
So we'd have to delegate,
Okay.
and then bring it back to chair and vice chair based on the ecologist's advice.
It will guarantee that you get an answer on the question in future. So yeah, okay, we'll do that. That is fine. Yeah, Councillor Cullick.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's positive and I welcome that. The only question I'm left with, and I would be happy to support, is having heard the concerns around parking on the grassed area, understanding that's not something that can be included in any way in the conditions, but is there some way that it could at least be referenced as an informative?
Well, it already is as an informative, isn't it? Which is routinely ignored with every development where it's, you know, an informative is every time you raise it, a gentleman's agreement. And it's meaningless.
There is an informative that we can put on the any decision notices about parking on grass verges. As Councillor Waters points out, it's not enforceable by under the Planning Act, but there should be other enforcement bodies within the authority that could take action.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Councillor Orrell.
Yeah,
please.
just have two principal concerns about this. First, that we haven't explored the 106 agreements, that we seem to be losing quite regularly. And the second is the protection of residents over the period of the development, which don't seem to be very, very strong. And residents could be left in a difficult position for a considerable length of time.
Yeah, which I think is an ongoing issue related to planning, isn't it? In terms of when we're asking future powers in terms of build out speeds on sites, but we haven't got anything that we've used previously, is there?
No, and government policy or through circular advice, which is probably still in force in terms of conditions. So you can't impose conditions about completion or speed of building.
Okay.
We have an update on the education contributions.
Okay, would you like to update on the education?
So education contributions at the moment are sought on major developments. So developments of 10 or more. Once upon a time, we did start the question, not necessarily a requirement, at 4, because that was a trigger for a place in education terms. But we don't have the supplementary planning document at the moment that allows us to do that. So that's something that'll have to follow.
Okay. Thank you. We've got a proposal in a second, so I'm going to continue to move towards vote on the officer recommendation. Gareth, could you take us through that, please? With
rather long.
Yes, also
Lost track.
so we will try and work out.
So the recommendation is now delegated authority to approve, subject to consultation with the chair and vice chair. In terms of the question about condition 14 and Swift bricks. There's an amendment to condition 15 regarding hedgehog holes. And there are two tabled additional conditions and the amended condition 9 and an informative regarding verge parking.
Thank you. In that case, going to see all those who are for moving the officer recommendation as outlined there, please. All those who are against. Okay, so that's one against, but otherwise that is approved, and we'll move on to the next application. I'll just take a quick 2-minute break for those who have come to be able to take themselves out, and then we'll start the next one. Thanks. Can we take a seat and we'll start up again? Thanks. We good? Okay, right. We'll start there. Next item is item 4B, which is 34 Fulford Place. Gareth, could you take us through the presentation for this one, please?
Thank you, Chair. 34 Fulford Place is a third floor, 2-bedroom flat within the Fulford Place development, which is at the corner of Fulford Road and Hospital Fields Road within Fishergate Ward. The flat sits at this corner of the development. The proposal is for a change of use. There's a close-up of the corner where the flat is situated. The proposal is a change of use of the existing property, which falls within C3 of the use classes order, a dwelling house. The proposal is conversion, change of use into a house in multiple occupation, which would have 3 bedrooms, and the 3rd bedroom formed from internal alterations within the kitchen diner stands at the moment. The property has, the development has communal parking at it appears about 1-to-1, so 1 space allocated per flat with a management on the basis of the signs located, the management of that parking area. And then there are communal bin and bike stalls within the courtyard formed by the scheme. Members will have seen the existing HMO numbers in the vicinity. My understanding is those numbers are entirely within Fulford Place itself. So those figures set out in 3.1 on page 50 is the level of accommodation within Fulford Place, the Fulford Place development. It's the end of the presentation, and there's no update to the conditions or the report.
Thank you. Does anyone have any clarification on plans before we move to public participation? There isn't an awful lot on plans, so yeah, okay. We'll move into public participation. First speaker is Kenneth Fox, speaking in objection. If you'd like to join us, please, Kenneth. As before, you'll have 3 minutes to talk. Just start when you're ready. Do you want a warning when you've got 30 seconds remaining, or are you happy to just? That's fine. I'll just give you a nudge when you get to that point. Thanks.
My thoughts on this are, many years ago, I applied for permission to build a small extension at the back of my house. My wife came and she was told in no uncertainty, do not dream of building it because we will come and tear it down. That's a few years ago. Now this one, it makes a mockery of it. Within a couple of days of us getting the planning application, the work was started. A large amount of mess was left behind by the people working on it. We have an unwritten rule in the apartments, no work after 5 o'clock at night, and 2 young families below it had to go tell these people who are working, knock it off. We have small children, want to go to sleep. Why do we need to destroy a perfectly good apartment that's a family apartment to make student accommodation? Let's face it, we're overwhelmed with flipping student accommodation in York at the moment. Absolutely heaving with it. They've been developed all over the place. It's destroyed a perfectly good apartment, turned into tiny student accommodation. I can't believe, but the fact that they've actually started the work and completed the work long before they've even had permission to do it. The work has been complete 6 or 7 weeks already. I think in decent haste was to get it complete in time for the new intake of students in September. We are trying to develop a real nice community. I only moved in there a year ago and I've now joined the residents committee. I want to get involved in what's going on. I don't want it to turn into another student accommodation like the one across the road, the one down the road, the one over there, the one over there, and possibly in a handful of time, I don't know, where Go Outdoors and Sainsbury's are. That's going to be possibly more student accommodation. Why? We are short of family accommodation in York. We are desperately short of family accommodation. But the mess that was left behind by these people when they were working there, they aren't tradesmen. I employed tradesmen. And if they'd left a mess behind like that, I would have kicked the backsides for them. They were just left all weekend for us to trip into our apartments. It was plasterboard that had been dragged across the floor. So it's white streaks, and George, bless him, our very good caretaker, had only completed the whole apartment, all of them, within the previous 2 or 3 weeks, shampooing all the carpets. He had to set on again and do it all again.
30 seconds. Just.
Sorry?
So, 30 seconds left.
Right, okay. That's more or less just of my moan. It's a very personal thing. I'm very annoyed about it. I moved there so I could have some peace and quiet in my retirement. I don't want to be living in student accommodation, because if this goes through, there's nothing stopping anybody else from doing it as well. We need proper accommodation for families in York, and we have proper accommodation we had. Now they've turned into 3 rabbit hutches. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Just if you stay there for 1 second, has anyone got any questions for the speaker before he goes back to seat? Yeah, Councillor Coles, please.
Can I just clarify that there currently aren't any HMO licenses in the block that you live in at the moment?
No.
Thanks.
Okay. Not seeing any hands, so if you want to take a seat, thank you for coming in and speaking. Next speaker is Philip Heaton. If you'd like to join us, please, Philip. And do you want a warning when you've got 30 seconds left, or are you happy to just carry on? Great, thanks. Yeah, just start when you're ready. It's fine.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. I'm a leaseholder and resident at Fulford Place, and also a director of Fulford Place Residents Management Company. And I represent the leaseholders and residents of the 91 apartments, including those owned by Yorkshire Housing. And we're objecting to this change of use from C3 to C4. The planning officer's report states that there are 8 HMOs at Fulford Place. This is puzzling. None of Yorkshire Housing apartments are HMOs. The council's HMO licensing department has told us that there is only one property listed as an HMO, which is flat 18. We've checked for planning applications across all 91 apartments, and the current application is the first application for change of use since Fulford Place was built in 2005. Something is amiss. Nevertheless, just because the policy is that there should be no more than 10% HMOs at street level, it doesn't mean there should be any HMOs. Fulford Place already has an appropriate mix of households and residents. This application is significant, not only because it's the first application for a change of use, but because it also breaches the lease. On behalf of the freeholder, the Fulford Place Service Management Company, Firstport, has issued a breach of lease notice citing the C3 status of residential apartments. And it's important to be honest here. The Firstport Legal Department are already preparing legal action against the applicant. And we're advised that action could be taken against the council too, if this is approved. The applicant has already demonstrated that they're not good managers of the property or care much about our community. Lease covenants are ignored, and they did conversion work without planning permission. Despite being asked to ensure the contractors were considerate of neighbours, including those with small children, there was excessive noise, disturbance, and a trail of dirt that had to be cleaned by our caretaker. The advice you've received regarding car parking is spurious. There's no way of knowing whether the occupiers of the proposed HMO would have only one car. And on-street parking in Hospital Fields Road is already under pressure.
30 seconds.
The other negative impacts of an HMR: increased cost of living for other residents through higher insurance premiums, water charges, more cleaning and maintenance costs, including lift servicing. All research shows that HMOs have a negative effect on social cohesion. Creating an HMO will remove a potential starter home from the mix, and there is an increased likelihood of noise and disturbance. I lived in an HMO for 2 years as a student. It was great fun. Our neighbours would not have agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions related to that? I'm not seeing any hands, so thank you again for coming in to speak. Thank you,
thanks.
And the final speaker is Brian Doherty, if he'd like to join us now. Do you want a warning, or are you happy to, in terms of 30 seconds to go? Yeah, great, no problem.
Going to be a little bit of overlap here. Apologies for that, if there is. So, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I come today as a concerned resident and property owner at Fulford Place, troubled by the proposed conversion of number 34 into a house of multiple occupation. I thank Councillor Conrad Whitcroft for intervening, as this matter was set to be approved without proper scrutiny. My concerns are about both the actions of the owner of number 34 and the process followed by Planning Officer Owen Richards, whose decisions about overlook key legal and community issues, in my opinion. The owner of number 34 has shown a disregard for rules and responsibilities required for running an HMO, as defined under the Housing Act of 2004. They have made interior changes without approval from the council or the management company. Yesterday, the management company issued a letter citing breaches of the freeholder's ground lease, demanding that these unauthorised changes be reversed. This irresponsible behaviour raises concerns about their future management of an HMO. While I plan to focus on lease breaches, the management company's swift action supports the points that I intended to raise. I'm also concerned with the planning process. Despite 9 formal objections, Owen Richards ignored the significant legal breaches of the lease. Without Councillor Whitcroft's intervention, this conversion would likely have been approved. Additionally, many residents weren't informed properly, with only a small sticker left on my building's notice board, thankfully by a neighbour, an ex-director. This lack of transparency is worrying, given the potential impact of the conversion. As residents, we are bound by the covenants of our ground lease, and any planning permission must respect these. Case law shows that local authority of approval of HMO conversions can be overturned if they violate lease covenants, as seen in Robinson Brand in 2007, where the court ruled against the conversion despite local authority approval. Lease covenants are enforceable under civil law, even if planning permission is granted. Our lease restricts converting the property from C3 to C4. Clause 32 prohibits boarding or lodging, which an HMO would likely qualify as. Clause 34 prevents nuisance or annoyance to other residents, which an HMO could cause through increased noise, waste and traffic. There's also the risk of higher utility consumption and insurance premiums, which are shared by all residents, violating clauses 16 and 25 of the lease. The financial and social impacts are significant. Studies from the Department for the Communities and Local Government show that overcrowded blocks face rising service charges due to increased communal area use. In our case, converting number 34 into an HMO would likely lead to higher service charges, rising utility bills, and increased insurance costs for all residents. In conclusion, converting number 34 into an HMO.
I can't just let you carry on speaking. Sorry, it's 3 minutes.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. And
I think you get the gist.
I understand. Thank you. But just to note, I know we normally ask people not to name officers specifically in that, and we have very competent officers. So if you can avoid, people can avoid naming specific officers and calling out their conduct in future.
My first time.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions? I just kind of, it's useful. I think we're going to raise questions around the leasehold later on to officers, so it's useful to have some clarity around that. Thank you. So that was helpful. But I don't see any other hands. So if you'd like to take a seat, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Councillor Cullick, sorry, questions in relation to the application, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It would be helpful, I think, at an early stage, if you could clarify the relationship between the sort of decision we're being asked to make today and existing lease arrangements and covenants and so forth, particularly having heard the concerns expressed by local residents, and maybe even to have some input on that. Could you help us with that?
So the planning permission gives permission under the Planning Act. That's all it does. It doesn't override any private property rights, covenants, lease conditions. The developer, the landowner would have to comply with any other provisions, building regulations or private matters. But the lease requirements or covenants on a property are not material planning matters. Long established.
Yeah, Councillor Baxter, and I'll take Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if we could get some clarification on how many HMOs there are, because we've heard conflicting things. Thank you.
Well, the issue with the HMOs and HMO database. So we have a database which is set up following the Article 4 direction. And that takes information from council tax records, HMO licensing, planning permissions that may have been granted, certificates of lawful use, and other known HMOs. And that's set out in the SPD as being the best approach. It's not perfect. There is the license register are all those properties which have a license. Two separate processes. So the information that we have in the planning permission, sorry, in the planning pages was on the basis of our planning database, which said that there were, I think it was 8. Sorry. 8 out of 91. Looking at the information that was provided, it appears that they were all due to council tax exemptions, so student occupation. What I don't know though is if I don't know whether the student exemptions are interrogated any further. So there may be properties which are exempt from council tax, but they aren't HMOs because they might only be occupied by 1 or 2 people. So I don't know that. So from it may be that 8 is incorrect and an over provision.
So I'll come to you. Councillor Melly, please. And then I've got Councillor Law and Councillor Astley.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if you could confirm whether the statutory consultation process was carried out correctly in terms of neighbour notification and site notices and that sort of thing, please.
I don't have that information in front of me. I could look it up, but I have to turn the screen off. I have no reason to believe that it hasn't been undertaken correctly on the basis if there was a site notice put on the notice board, however that was provided. But we either, an application such as this either has a site notice or it has, or we write to the neighbours. It's likely that the if we wrote to the neighbours, it would only be the neighbours on that particular corner block, because the requirement is for adjoining neighbours to be notified. And it may be that we did site notice because from the street gazetteer, you can't perhaps identify with a degree of confidence which properties touch the application site. But I can't confirm which one we did.
Councillor Waters, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the HMO, which I term loosely database. Year after year, I've brought applications here and challenged that database. It's meaningless, those figures, unless anybody can challenge them. And without seeing that database as ward councillors, you've no chance of challenging them. You might think there's too many, you might think there's not enough on there, but nobody allows you to see that information. That's why you end up with a problem like this. Residents are coming and saying the figures aren't right. How can the ward councillor support them or put them right? They can't. I appreciate that's not a question to you, Gareth, but I'll just throw it out for wider thought.
Thanks. Councillor Vassey, I don't think you'd.
Thank you, Chair. To make sure I've understood where we are so far. So 8 properties out of the 91 are not paying council tax and have declared that they believe they don't have to pay council tax. One of the reasons that might be is that a house is an HMO, or it's being run as a business or whatever. But 8 out of the 91 properties are declared to not be paying council tax. Is that correct? That's what you've said.
My understanding from the information I've been provided by the people who hold the database is that there are 8 properties within Fulford Place that are on that database.
Yeah.
And it appears that they are council tax exempt, which would normally be student. No, it would always be student exemption. That there would be no other reason why they would be included on the database.
Am I not
But
correct?
so that is that's updated periodically. So there will always be times when it might be out of date, but it's there's no other way of combining all these different data sources, and it's got a real-time process.
Can just follow up? Am I not correct in understanding that people can convert a home into a business and declare it as an Airbnb, for example, and not pay council tax? Aren't there multiple reasons why someone might not have to pay council tax?
That might be the case, but they wouldn't appear on the HMO database.
That wouldn't appear on that. Okay, if I can just follow up. So there were comments made about work having been done within the apartments. Can we be clear? This isn't an application to convert an apartment. This is simply an application for a change of use to an HMO. And any issues about whether building was done or not, or are we talking about requiring permission to carry out works? Because there aren't really any conditions here attached to hours of operation or whatever.
So the application is a change of use. If the works undertaken because they're internal works, wouldn't require planning permission.
Wouldn't.
So if the flat was occupied and the residents wanted to do what's shown on those floor plans within the existing use class to provide an extra bedroom or a gym or whatever, that wouldn't require planning permission.
Right. Okay, and just one last point, if I may, Chair. Sorry. I want to make sure we've understood the legal side of this. Properly nailed it down. So what are the implications for the council in relation to discussions, disagreements that may take place with regard to leases? What implications apply to us in relation to that? Are they we heard that an assertion that maybe action would be taken against the council. Are these things separate? Can we treat the issue of what does and does not exist in a lease as separate to what we're doing here today?
Hello, Rahina Chowdhury, Legal Services. So just to reiterate that we have a situation here where members are being made aware of private covenants within a private lease. These are not material considerations, as say Gareth has already mentioned. What we need to be clear is that we have a planning system and we have the separate licensing requirements. My understanding of the references made by our speaker is that there seems to be a confusion between the planning and the licensing. The legal team have looked at the cases that have been referenced, and we don't feel that any of those cases have any direct correlation to the planning aspects of this application.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Coles and I'll come to you, sorry.
Oh, there's a
Oh, is this
supplementary,
supplementary?
really.
Sorry, yeah, do you want to go now?
That's why I was trying to attract
Yeah,
your attention
thank you.
earlier. Thank you,
Yeah,
Chair.
that's
Just, I don't want to labour the point, but trying to understand the different figures, because we heard from one of our speakers, there are no HMOs in Fulford Place. So when we speak about the list, which is our best attempt to put together based on such things as council tax information, does that list potentially include properties with a single or with two occupants who would qualify for council tax exemption, and therefore there may be some counting of those properties which are not actually HMOs because it's only a single or two occupants?
I've made an assumption here, and my assumption is yes, but I haven't been able to speak to the people who compile the database today to find out if they just take the council tax exemption data, for example, and apply it to our database, or whether there's some, I don't know what you call it, sensitivity testing to see if actually some of those exempt properties aren't HMOs because they're only occupied by one or two. So yeah, there seems to be an issue here, but if it's the difference between 8 and 0 or 1, then I wouldn't say that's material to the decision you're making, because either way, that doesn't breach the thresholds within the policy or the SPD.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question, that even if there were that figure of 8, it would not breach the threshold, as it were, that we would then need to take into account.
It's close, but it's below.
But the discrepancy could well be, or it may be, that properties which are occupied by a single resident or two residents may be qualifying for council tax exemption, and therefore it may be that this could account for some of the discrepancy between the figure of 8 and 0.
Possibly.
Thank you.
Possibly the case.
Yeah, and Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things that I wanted some clarification about. My understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong, is none of this is about whether or not it's students or not students living in a property. Students could be living in that property right now as a 2-bedroom apartment, and there'd be no issues at all about them being there because that's what it was built as, and they could rent it now. And the person who is applying for this planning permission could be renting this property out right now to 2 people or 2 couples, because they would be 2 households in that property without there being any issues around this particular planning application. So that was just a thing I wanted to clarify. Can I just ask also, I'm slightly confused about, I'm just trying to look back at the change when the council changed the position on the licensing of HMOs. Is this what we are doing here? Is this planning permission to effectively provide a license for an HMO in this property, or is that a separate thing?
the license is a separate thing. This is purely, this is a change of use under Planning Act, material change of use from C3 to C4 required because of the Article 4 direction.
And would the
A
applicant,
separate license would be required.
not yet, no.
I think a license is only required in this case because of the additional licensing. Because this is a purpose-built block of flats, it wouldn't have been covered under mandatory license. So the changes that took place a couple of years ago, in terms of mandatory, in terms of additional licensing, is why this would require a license if occupied by 3 or more unrelated individuals.
So potentially the applicant may also need to apply for a license.
Yes.
To then be an HMO separate to this planning decision.
Yes, under the Housing Act.
So if I had questions about whether or not they were a suitable person to have a license, that would be a question for the licensing committee rather than for this committee, or does that happen? So it's just a decision for a housing matter? It's not a planning decision ultimately, whether or not this applicant who is applying for a planning permission to change use to an HMO is a fit and proper person, for want of a better word.
No.
To hold a license to have an HMO is a completely separate matter, but it actually feels important because ultimately whether or not you approve a planning application for someone to have an HMO or to change a use of a property to an HMO for somebody who we've no idea whether she lives at the property or not, and whether or not she intends to live at the property or not. But actually, we haven't got any information in here about whether or not she has other licenses in the city, whether there have been other HMOs where there might have been concerns, whether residents' concerns about what that might mean in terms of.
That's all irrelevant to the planning process.
Exactly.
Yes.
No, that's what I'm wanting to clarify. But
there's
it would not be irrelevant to the residents, but it would be relevant to the planning process.
Yeah.
But so just in terms of the planning process here, she has that the applicant has already completed some work that didn't require planning permission, because a family could have been living in that property who could have just decided to put another bedroom in because they needed an extra bedroom. They wouldn't have required planning permission, but she's actually made changes to the property. But if this was refused, this would then affect what that property looked like were she to sell it in the future, if she wasn't then able to use it as an HMO. Have I understood that right?
Yes, if permission were refused, the council's local planning authority would have no grounds to seek the removal of those partition walls. With no powers to do that.
Fine. And then my only other question was around the previous discussion around HMOs and whether or not there are or aren't any HMOs in that block already. Is it possible that there are some HMOs that predate the change in the requirement around planning? Or is it more likely we don't know, do we?
We started compiling the database when we introduced the Article 4 direction. So there may well be movement that lags behind or is in front of the changes we can make, because people may stop. For example, people might stop using a licensed HMO as an HMO and flip it back to a C3 dwelling, but they might not choose to actually hand in the license, just let it lapse after the year, and we wouldn't pick that up. Changes to, I'm afraid I don't have the figures in front of me. So some of the figures are updated yearly, some of them are updated quarterly, and the planning permission position is updated more frequently than that. So it's unlikely to be ever 100% accurate. but we don't have the resources to, we don't have the resources and we don't have systems that either talk to themselves technically or are allowed to talk to each other that updates it in real time.
And just finally, the reason that there was a requirement to change to apply for planning permission in this case is precisely for these kinds of areas where you might have people who have purchased or live in a residential property that they have purchased as a residential property. The reason you have to apply for planning permission is in order to protect exactly the kind of issues that residents have raised around the character. And if you could just clarify the reason why you have to apply for a change in planning permission here is in order to ensure that other residents in particular properties, particularly in areas like flats where people are already living relatively close to each other and the communal areas therefore are under more pressure than they would be, say, in a residential street. That is why these rules are in here, is in order to be able to inform how we make those decisions.
So prior to, I'm going to say 2010, might have been 2009, it might have been 2009. An HMO occupied by up to 6 people and a single dwelling, family dwelling, call it what you will. It was in the same use class. It was all within C3. The government made changes to the use classes order to introduce C4 to cover HMOs, and the definition of an HMO is similar to that in the Housing Act. So 3 or more unrelated individuals sharing basic amenities. The council then, because of various changes, the council to permitted development rights, all councils were able to introduce Article 4 directions if they felt that was necessary in their area. And that Article 4 direction removes permitted development rights from C4 to C3, so you need planning permission. And we introduced, York went down the line of introducing an Article 4 direction, and it introduced the SPD, and the reasons for that are set out in the papers, issues in terms of unbalanced communities and what were considered to be excessive concentrations of HMOs in certain areas, tipping a community from balanced and unbalanced. And we came up with those thresholds. So the 10% threshold of HMOs within street level and the 20% within the neighbourhood level. And when planning permission is applied for, we look at those figures first before going on to the other issues of wider residential amenity. I'm aware that other authorities where they've introduced SPDs have done it in a different way. So certain areas of the city, of their cities, in York, we decided to have the SPD over the whole of the urban area, and the idea being that it would be able to spread the impact of increased HMOs throughout the city, whilst trying to prevent those unnecessary or unneighbourly concentrations. So that's what we have here. That's what we have, the thresholds, and that's the thresholds that are set out in the papers in front of you. There are other strands of the policy regarding parking and general residential amenity, but I think, as you said, it's a property at the moment that could be occupied by 2 sharers without a change of use. It could be occupied by a couple with a lodger without a change of use. And this is a proposal for 3 unrelated residents with a condition, I believe, to limit it to 3. So we've looked at that. We've looked at the potential for intensity. We've looked at the numbers of HMOs in the area within those threshold levels. And we don't feel there are grounds to refuse planning permission.
Councillor Cullick and then Councillor Waters.
That was thank you, Chair. That was a very helpful summary of where we are. And I imagine that for members of the committee, that's very, very familiar. But for that to be rehearsed publicly, and I think for our public speakers to hear that is constructive. And I think, therefore, to summarize what you're saying, even without agreeing to this application and change of views, the property could currently be occupied by 4 residents if that were 2 couples. If it were 2 couples, it could currently be occupied by 4 residents. With a change of use, as we are being invited to approve, it could only be occupied by 3.
I can't answer the 2 couples. I can't answer that with any certainty that 2 couples could occupy without a change of use.
Chair, an HMO is 3 people from 2 or more households. So that is more than 3 people from 2 households. So that would still be an HMO.
Okay.
Yeah. Always that thing about who's on the tenancy and every yeah. It could very easily be used by 4, but probably not in a formal way where they're all on the same tenancy. Could just be people sharing.
So Chair, just to clarify on that, Councillor Cullick, you referred specifically to 2 couples that would be identified as 4 individuals. So it's 3 or more persons within the definition of a HMO. So I think Councillor Melly's clarification there was quite helpful to say that that would still fall within the definition of a HMO.
Thanks. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to Gareth's sort of appraisal of where we are and how it came about. I well remember it all because I was pushing at the time for the Article 4 direction to be brought in, and there was a lot of resistance at the council. And then when the consultation year was taking place, I was the only one to stand up and say that the thresholds were way too high. And I remember at the time saying that the threshold should be set at 0%, so that every single application had to be decided on its own merits. We've now got another application here that's below the threshold, which means that it will be approved. For the simple reason that if you refuse it, you know full well it will go to appeal and it'll be overturned. 3 years in December since I brought that motion to full council calling for the thresholds to be reduced, and we're still no further on. And I feel immensely sorry for these people.
Is this a question related to the application? Sorry.
Well, I'm throwing it out to you because we've just had that appraisal from Gareth, and I think we need to be fully appraised of where we are and why you're in this situation again.
Right. I'm not seeing any other questions in relation to this application, so I'm going to move forward into discussion on people who are happy to propose. I mean, obviously, we've had a lot of feedback there and comment on actually what we're being asked material in relation to the planning, but would anyone like to open discussion or make a proposal on this application? Councillor Melly, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very sympathetic to the residents, and it sounds like it has, their community and their neighbourhood of flats has been unpleasant recently because of the activities at this property in terms of mess and dust and noise, and breach of the lease agreement and trying to have that enforced and that sort of thing. I'm very sympathetic to all that, but they're not planning matters, and we're only here to assess planning matters and planning policy. There's a bit of confusion over the number of HMOs in this block, and that might be something for the ward councillors to go away and have a look at if there are HMOs in this block that aren't licensed and see if they can do something about that. But either way, we have policies about thresholds, and whether there's 0 or 8 HMOs, it fits within policy. I don't see any aspect of this application that doesn't fit with planning policy. And so I think we have to follow the officer recommendation to approve.
Thank you. Councillor Vassy, please.
I have a lot of sympathy with the position set out by councillor Melly. I mean, what we've learnt in the past 40 minutes is that anyone in Fulford Place could add a room or remove a room without anyone being able to say anything because it's internal. We have no idea how many people already have 3 bedrooms or don't have 3 bedrooms or have put them in and taken them out. We don't know whether the apartment is currently occupied by a family with 2 children, or it could be tomorrow, or 3 children, or whatever. So there doesn't really seem to me to be any planning grounds on which one would say no to the application. I am a little concerned, I should say, at the characterisation of it being an issue if there's students. The reality is that there are plenty of families who have students living with them. I can testify to the same thing myself. I'm tempted to agree with Rachel Melly that I think there's no grounds for not approving this.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. There ought to be grounds for refusal, but of course, it's purely a numbers-based decision, is this, and it shouldn't be. You should be making the decision on the fact that the comings and goings from 3 separate households in one flat is going to add considerably to the noise, disruption that, you know, council tax paying residents will actually now face. And of course, there's the issue of the car parking. How on earth does that fit the standards when there's only 1 allotted car parking space for 3 separate households? Yeah. But I realise that you will be just taking this decision based purely on the percentages, which, as we've learned in the last few minutes, nobody can actually define if they're correct or not.
Yeah. Not seeing any other hands. I mean, I'll just note the same as you've really said there, Councillor Melly and Councillor Vassy, fully understand the concerns of residents, but really what we're being asked to look at here is potentially 1 additional household moving into that property beyond what's there currently. From parking, it's 1 additional car in terms of what we're being asked to look at. I don't think from what we've been given material wise, there is anything that we can do, any reason to see to do anything but approve the application would be my view of what's here on paper. I haven't had anyone propose our second. I'm happy to propose the recommendation that we move after recommendation. Would anyone like to second that formally? Yeah,
I thought I had proposed it, to be honest, but happy to second it if you're proposing it instead.
Yeah, so that's seconded. Gareth, could you take us through the recommendation, please?
That the planning permission be granted, subject to the conditions as set out on page 54, 55 of the officer report.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, in that case, can I see all those who are for moving the recommendation, please? All those who are against? Okay, so that is approved and the application is approved on that item. Thank you. We'll just take a quick, literally 2-minute break, then we'll be moving on. Thank you. Right, we'll make a start on the final application, and then we've got a very quick item after that as well. So on 4C, please, could you take us through the presentation for this, please, Gary?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the application site is 43 Broadway West. Google 3D image. So the property here, this is a out-of-date image. There's been demolitions and extensions to the rear since this image was taken, and they'll be apparent on the photographs taken by the planning officer. So the proposal is for a this helps. So it's a ground floor extensions which were built following, I think, a 2020 planning permission. And they replaced this what looks like a converted garage, and then a lean-to with a polycarb roof. So the proposals are for a first floor extension above that existing ground floor. It's an L shape. So this is the rear wall, the original dwelling. And this is the proposal at first floor level. There's also proposals to clad the existing dormers in materials to match the existing roof. And then the two-story element, the first floor element, has a flat roof, and that will have these solar panels. Photographs of the rear, so this kind of illustrates where we are at the moment. You've got those later additions from that 2020 planning permission. Dormers to be reclad. Adjoining next door neighbour at number 41. And then just a photograph from the different angle, illustrating the relationship between this property and the neighbouring property and the extensions over both. Oh, and that's it. Yeah, there's nothing further to add, and there are no updates to the report or any of the proposed conditions.
Thanks. Yeah, Councillor Wardby.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I can't quite get my bearings. So is there any windows on the side for overlooking and lots of privacy and things like that, lots of amenities, please? Because I didn't quite get the photos. So that's my fault.
No.
There's nothing.
Not at first floor. So this is the.
That's fine. I just wanted.
This is the elevation facing number 45, right? And this is the elevation facing number 41, the adjoining property. This is roof light here at ground floor level, but that is already, well, there's a similar one already in existence on the extension in place at the moment.
Thank you. Is there any loss of sunlight or anything? Because obviously it's another story. And it seems like quite a big wall going up against the neighbour.
It's that's particularly on it. It's unlikely to be significant. So it's south facing. So the extension as proposed would be to the west of the of the adjoining property. But the adjoining property has a ground floor addition already. So here. And the proposed first floor extension doesn't go beyond that. So really the impact you're looking at, other than maybe through those roof lines, the impact you're looking at is on the bedroom. And in terms of, there's still a decent outlook down these gardens, and then a significant depth of garden to the property in so outlook is unlikely to be significant impacted. Afternoon sunlight, there is going to be impacts on that, but to the bedroom, you have to look at how important you see afternoon sunlight to a bedroom. I don't think we would rank that particularly high to outline the principle of the
Councillor Waters.
Just as a follow-on to that, if you look at paragraph 5.9 on page 65, near the end of it, there hasn't been any representations from neighbours that could potentially be affected, has there?
No, there hasn't. It's, you know, the planning law requires that we take into account any representations that are made. It doesn't say anything about taking into account representations that aren't made. But you know, members can choose to give weight or no weight to the fact that there haven't been representations. There has been a representation in support, but as far as I'm aware, it's not from either of the neighbours.
Yeah, Councillor Collick, please.
Thank you. My question was very similar insofar as I wanted to check there hadn't been any objections. I see there's one representation of support received, but also to clarify, as you already have, that in terms of a planning decision, it's consideration of the amenity, whether or not there would be an objection.
Thanks. Not seeing any other queries, so we'll move into public participation. You'll see written statements being handed round from the applicant with details around the application. Jamie Wood, the applicant, is here to answer any questions. Is there anything you'd like to say, or are you just happy to take questions at this point?
I'll just to say that I'm here because of the importance this is to us, and there are complicated things about this application, which I'm sure you're aware of, which is why I didn't want to say them openly on the webcast. But it was simply that I'm here to answer questions and the importance of this to us, because it's the only way that I can be in this house with my family, because without this, I'm not going to be able to sustain this house. And there is a lack of housing, which is suitable, which is accessible with a family in York, which is anywhere, has the same amenity value as this.
Does anyone have any questions on the report or the application before we move into discussion? Councillor Millie.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering which aspects of this application could be done under permitted development rights and which parts need planning permission, because there's various aspects like recladding of existing dormers and installation of solar panels and that sort of thing.
Adding of the dormers could probably be done under permitted development rights because it uses materials materials of a similar appearance to those used on the roof. It's unlikely any of the first floor could be because of the height above height in proximity to the boundary. And the solar panels, without their first floor, they would be floating. So they come as a couple.
Right. Not seeing any questions, so we'll just move into discussion and proposal. Councillor Waters, please.
Well, I'd just like to move things on and move approval. It's quite clear, again, from the written statement we've had, the necessity of this application being approved. It's quite clear that neighbours are obviously unconcerned. It's quite clear from the photographs up there that there's a myriad of different sort of planning applications that's gone on in the past. This won't look out of place, and the fact that you get the dormers reclad in hanging tiles is a benefit aesthetically. So I'm just moving approval.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Wardby, I've got next.
I'd like to second, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to assume none of those hands were anything apart from to second. But I will ask. Yeah, fine. Thank you. So in that case, yeah, happy to move to officer recommendation. Take us through that, and then we'll move to a vote.
Chair, the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to the conditions as set out on page 66 of the report.
Thank you. Great. Can I see all those who are for moving the officer recommendation? Yeah, that is unanimous. So that is approved. Thanks. We won't take a pause there. We'll just move on. We've got one final item, which is planning appeals tonight. It's a quick report. Yeah, of course, that's fine. Thanks. If you could just take us through the report, please, guys. Anything you want to mention?
So this is the vaguely quarterly appeals reports. We've had received 10 decisions in the quarter. Table 1 shows we had two of those appeals allowed, which is 20%. Nationally, in the same quarter, the appeals allowed were 28%. None of the appeals were major applications. None of the appeals related to committee decisions. Table 2 is a 12-monthly figures ending in the 30th of June 2024. We had 28% of our appeals allowed, which is bang on the national average. Looking through, there's no particular trends in those dismissed appeals. Some that we may raise eyebrows at, but nothing challengeable in law. Currently, we have 12 appeals that have been started by the Planning Inspectorate, where we are awaiting a decision, and they're set out on page 87 and 88 of the agenda. I'm not aware, I can't recall that any of those decisions are committee decisions. There are lots more appeals in the system, but have yet to receive start dates, so they don't come out on the list until we have those start dates. I was taking a question.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions about the report, Councillor Melly?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about the application, case number 23/00024/ref. It's in the annex with the kind of extra information. It starts at the bottom of page 82 and continues on to page 83. I was just wondering if you had any more information than what's included in here about this slightly bizarre decision where the council refused planning permission, and then at appeal that was overturned because refusing planning permission would mean that the tenants would have to be evicted, and then the inspectorate imposed a condition that meant the tenants had to be evicted anyway. I just wondered if you had any more information about that, about why such a bizarre decision was made.
That in terms of, so the inspector put the limit of the number to 4. Yeah.
The house presumably was a joint tenancy, and so to reduce the tenants, you have, or on one tenancy, you have to end the tenancy for all tenants. You have to evict them all. You can't only evict 2.
I think so.
So it's
yeah, when we've dealt with planning applications, retrospective applications where they are occupied, we tend to allow the tenancy to run its course because we have to give a a reasonable compliance figure. I'd not come across a decision, and the inspector has to take it into account because there are human rights impacts, but generally, given generally the planning system is not seen as incompatible with the Human Rights Act as long as you're reasonable and taking everything into account. So it was a strange one, but not strange enough. Not strange enough for us to consider it. What's the word? It's not unlawful, is it? It's ultra vires challengeable in the courts. Yeah, but we're not going to change our. We wouldn't see any reason to change our approach in terms of tenanted, unlawful HMOs. We feel our approach of being reasonable in our enforcement notices would ticks all the boxes in terms of Human Rights Acts. And that, you know, if they're occupied by students, I don't know if they were, then it's likely they were only on 12-month tenancies anyway. But yeah, strange one.
Yeah. Councillor Waters, please.
Yeah, well, referring to the same one, it does show that inspectors can be flexible when it comes to the 10% limit. And I just wish committee was able to be flexible in refusing them under the 10% limit.
And that flexibility tends to be upwards, not downwards for these things with the inspectorate, which is fair enough. I mean, they've got to look at everything on its merits, and sometimes they feel that a breach of 1 or 2% is never going to be material on the ground, and they're entitled to make that decision.
That's precisely why we should be operating the system that Leeds City Council operate, of having a 0% threshold and looking at every single HMO on its own merits properly, instead of just waving them through because they're below a 10% threshold.
Yeah, Councillor Melly, and we've got Councillor Bassey as well.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of these applications where either the application was retrospective, the development had already happened and it was refused and the appeal was dismissed, or the development went ahead after the application was refused and also the appeal was dismissed. I was just wondering, sorry, I know it's slightly outside of your usual purview, but do you know if the council is pursuing enforcement action against those properties where the development's been carried out despite not having planning permission?
Ordinarily, we would do. So if planning permission is, for either development that's already taken place and planning permission is refused and the appeal is dismissed, we would normally be looking at taking action to have the breach removed.
And Councillor Bassey, please.
Thanks, Shay. Just for information, so table 1 shows us there was a split decision, and when I first read that, I thought, oh, it must be like a boxing match or something. I can't agree, and nothing happens. But I'm assuming that can't be right. Does that mean that the appeal, is that referring to the one where the appeal is partly allowed and partly not allowed? Yes. And what are the cost implications for the council in those kinds of circumstances where that happens?
There are no costs implications unless the inspector makes a costs award against us for unreasonable behaviour, but that doesn't happen very often. So in this case, there were you tend to find split decisions on adverts because we're allowed to make split decisions. We don't make split decisions on planning applications. So I think in this case, I think we'd made a split decision and that we'd refused 1 and allowed 3 or something like that, or maybe 2 and 2, and the inspector didn't quite agree with everything we said and allowed one of the ones that we'd refused, and but I think he still refused one of them. Must have done it, wouldn't he? I think we split. So yeah, it tends to happen with adverts. Technically, the planning inspector, the Secretary of State has the right to issue a split decision on a planning permission as well, but it doesn't happen very often.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Maybe just confirm for future reference, there haven't been any costs awarded against the council in the last quarter then for any appeal decisions?
We didn't look at that. I don't remember there being, no. I have to sign them off, so no, there hasn't been.
Yeah. It's always useful to know when we get certain people trying to frighten us over making decisions that there'll be cost implications. Well, it's, as you've said earlier, it's very rare.
Thanks. Okay, I'm not seeing over the hands. I would just thought I'd ditto your comments yesterday at the briefing that on the whole it's positive in terms of the numbers that we get back, and yeah, thanks. I'm running that. There's no urgent business, so we will finish there, and that's the end of the meeting. So thanks everyone's time again.
Thank you, Chair.